Welcome back. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Yvonne Levy. Hi, Yvonne. How are you?
I'm doing fine today. How are you doing? It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm doing great. Yvonne is an acknowledged consultant and speaker in the area of data strategy, data governance, and analytics. Yvonne has spent his career leading both practitioners and executives in delivering a range of technology solutions from software product development to business focused transformations. He has led high profile projects for customers in financial services, energy, health, life sciences, government, and retail industries. Yvonne has been published in a wide variety of industry magazines, is a featured speaker and instructor at industry events. He is faculty member at University of Maryland, TDWI, and is a best practices judge in areas of analytics and data management. Yvonne, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to present. We look forward to your presentation. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, it's terrific. I really appreciate being here. I've had the good fortune of working most of my career in the analytics and data management space, and it's funny how things have evolved. We've gone from trying to grab and beg and plead for data to now data sharing becoming a fairly common event. I read an interesting statistic that every time a piece of data is produced, 10 to 12 business activities are dependent on it. And if you go back a few years, data sharing was actually an anomaly. Most operational platforms, we see some of this still today, most operational platforms are built to run their functions, feeds, speeds, and qualifications, and that's a good thing. But some of the challenges occur when we have to get that data. And it's very rare, even in this day and age, that all operational platforms have been designed to share content. It's as though I walk into a grocery store and I've got beautiful aisles, everything's organized really well, and there's no door to get in, and there's no door to get out, and you're not allowed to be given a basket. So came up with this concept a number of years ago as a means of trying to communicate, hey, we need the data. And we need to design systems in our processes to make it easy to access, because you've heard a number of analogies and comparisons that data is the new oil. My attitude is I just want to make data like an office supply. I go to the cabinet, or I go to the drawer and I can get it, and it doesn't take rocket science or ETL skills to be able to get it. And one of the premises here with the idea of a data supply chain is the awareness that it's more than just a finished product. It's something that it evolves and is refined. Individuals might want it in a raw form, in a cooked form, in a plated form. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So let me go ahead and jump into the slides. I start off with a very simple idea. Here's Susan. Susan just wants to analyze purchase details. And what typically happens in the reality of data sharing and provisioning, well, Susan basically has to go search, find, dig, and have her staff members figure out where's that data. Because while we've all built warehouses and BI platforms, and we've got the core content, in most instances, there's inevitably some incremental content that we need, whether it's a preference, whether it's a customer historical detail, did they pay their bill, those types of things. So I spend all this energy searching and finding, and then the system that has the data have to go beg, borrow, and plead to get it. Because in many instances, our IT infrastructure environment are not staffed to actually share the data. They're staffed to be able to run the operations and make sure that bills go out, or that student details are tracked, or that things are measured and dealt with. So if we get the file, it's usually dumped in some sort of extract or backup format. So then I got to go fish and figure out, well, what is the format of this data? How many columns? Is it comma delimited? Is it delimited at all? Is it EBCDIC? Is it ASCII? How do I figure out what the field values are? And then inevitably, a month later or 2 months later, that extract and that data format changes, because something's changed on the operational platform, or the program that manages that extract has changed, and things go awry. So what it really requires is that if I want to get data, even if I'm a business user, someone that's just using Excel trying to make a decision, trying to analyze content, I've got to become a desktop ETL junkie. And I would argue that's not where we need to be. And in fact, what we need to make sure that we're dealing with is we're packaging data the way it wants to be used. And I use this concept of a packaged, ready to use. Because think about the way products are set up. If we managed consumer packaged goods, and I tend to use retail examples a great deal, we don't deal with things at the convenience of the manufacturer. We deal with things for the convenience of the user or the customer. So if Heinz Ketchup was an operational platform in the way that we share data, in fact, what would happen? Well, in all reality, we'd back up a 35,000 gallon tanker truck. Tanker truck would be filled with 35,000 gallons of ketchup. Someone would be walking through the aisles, probably like a fireman with a cap, a coat, spraying ketchup all over the aisle, because, of course, that's very easy. No need to be bothered by that. And here you are trying to go to the grocery store wanting to get ketchup, and you're walking through with an umbrella protecting yourself, and you're scooping up ketchup and putting it in your pockets because, of course, that's the only way you can get it, because it's in some crazy unknown format. And in reality, no one sells ketchup that way. We don't sell products that way. In fact, Heinz or Hunt's or whomever the product manufacturer realizes, I've got to package this stuff the way that people want to use it. And one of the mistakes that we make is, unfortunately, we don't think about data that way. We think often about data as a byproduct of an application rather than, wait a second, this is something that others will need to use. And again, 10 to 12 other business activities, not applications, not systems, not platforms, but business activities. That's someone doing analysis. Someone's trying to make a decision, trying to figure out the right price of something, trying to understand what the capacity of a meeting room or conference might be, or how many people have signed up for those types of things. So, I mean, in reality, the thing that we need to realize, and not criticize, but realize, is that data is delivered really at the convenience of the producer, because we don't view data sharing as a production responsibility. It's a business operational responsibility. And I would argue what we really need to think about is the way products are delivered, because products are delivered at the convenience of the user. Going back to my ketchup analogy, you don't walk into the grocery store with one and buy 5 gallons of ketchup. If you're in a restaurant, you might get it in packets or a pump with a little container. You might see a bottle on the table or a squeeze bottle. And for your home, you have various squeeze bottles in different sizes. And if you're in an institutional environment, well, you'll get 5-gallon buckets. So they package the product based upon how it's used. Otherwise, people won't use the product. And I think we need to adjust the way we look at data, not so much as a byproduct of an application and something that we desperately need, but as something that if we really perceive it as a product, then in reality, it needs to be delivered in a manner that supports how people want to do things. It needs to be packaged, ready to use. So I mention that because if you consider what our data environments look like today, every new data request tends to be this one-off, custom-build activity rather than realizing that, in fact, it's going to occur again and again and again. Heinz doesn't package ketchup in a customized fashion for one customer. They package it for tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of customers and retailers and so forth. So I mentioned that because now let me frame some of the issues and the ideas with the data supply chain. Now, obviously, I'm big into definitions because I think not so much from an academic perspective, but from a perspective of, well, what exactly are we talking about? So what is the supply chain? And just generic run-of-the-mill manufacturing-based supply chain, connected series of processes that involve the production and transportation of goods from original materials to the finished product. And the reason I like that definition, in reality, it's also characterizing I've got some level of manufacturing or refinement or assembly or processing that's necessary to take these raw goods and produce it for someone to use it. And if you consider the various ingredients that go into anything, those ingredients could change. The second, a system of organizations, people, activities, information, and resources involved in supplying a product or service to a consumer. And I like that from a data perspective because we rarely in this day and age have the luxury of having data come from a single source. In fact, we run into challenges where, depending on the type of content, we may have multiple sources. For those of you that work in standard B2C type environments, I may acquire a customer from a marketing activity. They may show up because of warranty. They may walk through the doors as a customer or one of several other situations. So it's not uncommon for companies to have 4 or 5 different systems of origination or 4 or 5 systems that actually create the data. So understanding all the different individuals and the way that I get access to that content and the inevitable rules and details around that so I can gather it, stock it, and modify it and assemble it and build it so it's actually usable for what the end consumer requires. Third, a supply chain is a network between a company and its suppliers to produce and distribute a specific product to the final buyer. What's interesting about this is it actually triggers the idea and the concept that the individuals that are providing you information or data or product could in fact become a customer. of that. And very often we tend to be very, very focused because we're all analytical folks and just want to get stuff done. But we sometimes don't think about how data will be used once we get it. I mean, we're in many instances very frustrated because the source system doesn't necessarily fix the data that it has, or it can't. So we go to all this energy and effort to try and fix, adjust, standardize content, but we don't necessarily think a lot about, so who else might use this content? Certainly we're producing and delivering data for reporting platforms, dashboards, and all kinds of other analytical things. But really, I think there is one challenge that we tend not to look at the data we produce as a standardized part, as something that is multi-purpose. We often, because of time constraints, resource limitations, we run into problems where people will produce just a single report table. So everything is well-oiled, well-defined, streamlined. I drop data into fact tables and dimensions, and it runs a series of reports. But now when I want a different purpose or a different function, I've got to augment some of that content. I've got to literally build everything from scratch again because I didn't focus on how do I make sure that the data that's ready to use truly is packaged like ketchup. I can put it on a sandwich. I can put it in a recipe. I get it plain if I really love ketchup. Is your data really positioned that way? Have you standardized the item, the part, the detail, so it is ready to use, and the consumer can see it without understanding all the different historical lineage, transformation, mapping, standardization, things that happened? I mean, I don't know how ketchup is produced. I don't really care how ketchup is produced. I see the ingredients, that's good. I know where it's manufactured, and I know what I'm getting. How many of us have had the luxury of receiving a source file or any sort of file with data content and knowing what's in it? Or did we have to open it up and look? I mean, there's a lot of ways to do that, whether you're a JSON person, an XML person, or just Excel. So it's certainly feasible to do those things, but we never think about that because we're all rushed. We have very compressed schedules. And I would argue, I challenge you to think about that. I actually have one client in the hedge fund industry. They have 100 million data files. And I actually didn't believe them until I went and looked. It was 100 million data files. They produce dozens, if not hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands every day. They don't label them. They don't categorize them. They just dump them at the convenience of wherever the user, the person that would produce it. And they don't know what's there. And they're petrified of deleting something because they want to get back to it, even though, in fact, they don't know what it is. They don't know what it contains. And only maybe a few people know what it's called. So again, goal of this presentation is to challenge your paradigm of how do you deliver and make data available, and is it reusable, and is it accessible a day from now, a week from now, a month from now, a year from now? Finally, a supply chain is an entire system that produces and delivers a product or service from the very beginning stage of sourcing and raw materials to the final delivery of the product or service to the end users. I'd say the other thing that we all embrace and understand is the amount of energy that goes into I'm delivering data to an analytics environment, and all the different steps that go into what are the appropriate sources, what is it defined, and get it at the right time from the source system. For those of you who ever deal with financial systems, the whole idea of, well, I would just want to understand what sales or deposits or revenue is. Well, if I'm doing a deposit, do I want to make sure that deposit clears? Because that's several days later, and there's certain codes associated with a particular transaction that says, okay, they deposited this check, it's in the account, they're accruing interest, and they have access to those funds. However, it is not cleared. So do you include that in the balance? Or if you're in a retailer and someone's paid for something, well, if they paid for it in cash, that's fine. But there's a difference between what I charge somebody versus the tender they offer and then what they actually pay, change and things like that. So I mention those things because I like this definition, because it's also about the timeliness and the incremental content that occurs as data evolves, whether you want to call it life cycle or maturity process or whatever. So I go through these definitions of supply chain because if you take a look at some of the complexity of what we go through in producing and creating data to support the analytics, this is just kind of like the noise that goes on behind the scenes, but it's fairly complicated. And if we're not careful, I could have data coming from multiple different sources based upon the whims of multiple different developers. And I don't mean whims as a whimsical perspective, but based upon what their knowledge is. And if we're not careful, I have 4 different versions of things because I didn't lay out a supply chain. So if we take a look at, well, what is a supply chain? I'd actually characterize as 4 basic stages. I call details of a supply chain. It's really, the idea is I've got standardized parts that can support multiple purposes. So if we call something a customer ID, it should be well understood and defined. This is what a customer ID is, how it's represented, where it comes from, what it means. Parts that are identified, designed, and tested. So I don't just pull it out of a system and drop it into a file. One of the jokes that I tell people is, how would you feel if you walked into a grocery store and you went to the back to the meat counter and you grabbed a package of hamburger and there was this little decal on the hamburger and said, it probably won't kill you. You'd probably be paused. For those of you that are vegetarians, you probably wouldn't care. But for those of you that aren't, you're cannibals or meat eaters like me, the idea is you just assume that hamburger's been refrigerated at the right temperature the entire time. It was inspected and reviewed and tested, so you don't have to worry about those things. Well, many of our users assume those things, but in fact, we haven't necessarily put the tooling in place. So the whole idea is, if I've got a supply chain, I actually check the data or I check the item as it is processed and proceeds through the supply chain. Think about the way that we, I grew up in Central Florida, so if you've ever had to open up a carton of orange juice, you know what happens. There's a bunch of people that are picking oranges out in the field, and they dump things into crates or dump things into trucks, and then that truck is oranges, good and bad, stems, leaves, stones, all kinds of other stuff. Now, you don't necessarily just push all that stuff to the processing plant when the truck shows up at the processing plant. You go, wait a second. We've got to inspect and understand and only put usable oranges into the system. Otherwise, we'll break the equipment, we'll slow things down, and we don't make any money. So the first thing they do is, let's take out the rocks, the leaves, the limbs. Let's clean up everything. Let's actually then test it and move on, which is okay. Move to the next phase, which is okay. Let's pull out the rotten oranges. Now, great. Let's make sure everything is good. Now, let's go process the oranges. So the whole idea here is that with a supply chain, I have an incremental approach that's uniform, that's fast, and I'm not testing things before it's necessary, and I'm not over testing and over measuring things that aren't required. So the other benefit of a supply chain is, because I've created these incremental phases and I've defined them. Now, if someone wants raw data, they know where in the process to go pull it. If they want something that's been business rationalized, again, they know where to pull it. And if they want something that's very unique for a particular type of process, let's say analytics, where they need long, wide rows, where there is a lot of denormalization because I've got every descriptive detail on there, well, great, that's plated, and we provide that too. But again, the idea is procure. Let's go get it from the right places and all the steps associated with it. Manufacture. Let's actually do the production and assembly and so forth. Stores. Let's make sure we've got the inventory and it's the details that everybody wants, and we make it packaged and accessible to everybody. And then deliver. Well, it's delivered to the appropriate party. So the whole other premise here is, it allows us to update, modify, and improve the entire system and keep things running. I mean, you don't ever want a supply chain to stop. You don't ever want a manufacturing process to stop. So it also allows us to focus on efficiency. My remark about over-testing and under-testing, or not testing, the whole idea of writing ETL code, and then inside all this ETL code, I've got testing. Well, wait a second. I should have only delivered usable, processable data into the ETL job. I should have only put usable data into the staging table. So when data is actually delivered to an end user table, we don't have to over-test and over-assume. We've done this incrementally. Still have to check things. So the point that I'd have you think about with the supply chain is applying the right level of attention and the right level of processing as you go. So in fact, if I take a look maybe at a slightly more granular level, procure is really identifying the suppliers. You notice this is supply chain. I haven't gotten to the data part yet. Identifying the suppliers and the items. What do we go through to make sure that we have possibly multiple suppliers of every item? What's the whole way it's delivered or acquired? And what are the items that we're going to actually be receiving, and keeping track of those things? I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you walk into a Walmart towards the later part of the evening, you'll see pallets or crates in the aisles. And it's very interesting, because how do they plan the size of the aisle? It's based on the size of the box. They allow two boxes to go side by side, so they never block an aisle. Well, fascinatingly enough, take a look at the size of their trucks. Those boxes actually fit really tight and well inside the truck. So it's an issue of efficiency. And if you do a little bit of reading, you'll learn that Walmart was very, very strident and rigorous years ago about, wait a second, the largest quantity of individuals touching these products are the ones in the stores, and they happen to be a little bit lower on the compensation level. So I need to make sure everything's clear because I can't waste their time. Because if I waste one person's time, I'm probably wasting 50, 60, 150,000 people. So there's very clear instructions on here's a package of stuff. Let's label it so they know what's in that box, because I don't want to waste time, money, and energy putting the box in the wrong place. So they know what's in the box before they open the box. And when the box shows up at the loading dock in the back, they check to make sure, is this what we ordered? Is it complete? Or it doesn't go into the store? The point that I'd have you think about is how many times have you received files or passed them on and they weren't checked for that? So then someone downstream has to then go apply other standardization and checking and cleansing and other testing. Because what you gave them, there wasn't a checkpoint to ensure, is this really what they asked for? And does it abide by what people are looking for? So on the manufacturing side, once I've procured and I have what these standard items are, I don't worry about the 42 different variations from the sources. A pen's a pen's a pen. A customer ID is a customer ID. I shouldn't have to know what system it came from, and I shouldn't even have to touch it by the time I get it to here. I assemble and I build records, I build data, I build componentry that others need that's uniform and reusable. And then on the store side, and when I say store, I mean inventory or storage, the idea of give me one place to go get this stuff. For those of you that come from the university world, if you ever worked in chemistry, there's the supply area where you got all your chemicals. If you work in a building and you're not remote, well, you'll obviously know where all the office supplies and things like that are. Where is it? And in fact, you'll notice that those types of environments are set up to deliver goods, not on manufacturing goods and not coming in from a supplier. It's organized so people can get it. Think about the difference with the way a library is set up. The library is not set up for people to deliver books to the place. The library is set up so you, if you know science and you know the 900s, you can get the book yourself and you know how it's organized by title or by author, and you can use a card catalog and go off and get that. Again, the whole idea of how do you inventory and manage content, because in most BI and analytic environments, we in fact haven't organized our data for someone to self-serve. We've organized that data to run and run and deliver reporting and dashboards and processing. That's not a bad thing, but the needs have evolved. So again, our supply chain needs to evolve to support that. I need to be able to deliver a report or dashboard at the convenience of a developer building something, but I also need to make sure that a user themselves can go find the data they want. So then the whole premise of delivering is, how is that content being delivered? Via an application, a box on a shelf, or a file? So I'm mixing metaphors rather crazily, but the whole idea is, what is procure? Identify the sources, acquire the raw data, manage receipt, and make it available. So it's really, let me have a back door where everything shows up so no one downstream needs to worry and deal with the 14 different sources of content. For those of you that deal with third-party content, whether it's commercial syndicated providers like an Axiom or someone like that, or Equifax or Experian, or in fact some of the open data content that's available through governments and other institutions, how often do we require all the developers to have to go figure that out rather than let's set it up and simplify? The premise of manufacturing, obviously, is transform raw data into formatted detail. The ETL processes or ELT processes that we often, or data engineering processes that we often refer to, stores the whole idea of, once I've built it, where is it? In the data world, do we have a data lake where it's raw content that's been well structured and communicated and documented, or is it more of like a warehouse, so it's enterprise rationalized and defined, or is it an analytics platform where it's been set up to work specifically inside a particular tool? And then delivery, which is, okay, let's make sure that data is delivered and accessible to those environments. The difference between store and deliver is knowing where the stuff is versus how it's packaged. Maybe a good way of looking at it is, I know that I'm shipping something via FedEx and I've got to pick it up, but I need to know how large the box is to make sure it'll fit in my car. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on. So again, what I've tried to do here is offer up more of a data-centric view of our supply chain. Again, we still have procure, manufacture, store, and deliver, but in fact, the whole premise of data acquisition is handling all the delivery or the access of files. I work in many environments where, we get a bunch of different extracts, and I mean hundreds per day. There's inevitably data showing up in streams where we've got to manage streaming content and converting that into a usable format for others to access, or they link to the stream. You inevitably have APIs, FTP processing otherwise. So there's not uncommon to have a dozen different delivery or access methods. Well, let's address that centrally. So people look at data as either a transaction or a file, and they don't have to worry about all the different interfaces to simplify it. I mean, think about when you order something from Amazon. Do you know all the manufacturers it came from? Do you know if Amazon buys it at 100 a click or 50 at a click or one at a time? No, you don't care. But Amazon has its inventory, and if you order it, they know if it's an inventory, and you place the order, and it shows up. So then on to the manufacturer, and you'll see my little derrick with a bunch of people running. This is, as I mentioned, the data pipelining or the data transformation or the standardization or all the other development things that's now assembling, modifying, and adjusting the data to suit a more uniform multi-purpose need. I actually store it in the various repositories. Now that may be a data lake where I have raw content, so it's reflecting the format of the sources, but not all the interface and access aggravations, because for those of you that ever dealt with SAP and the 22 character German names. Come on, let's be realistic. We want to make these repositories the store point in our data supply chain easily accessible, like going to a bookcase or going to a supply cabinet. And obviously, there's a whole slew of variety of platforms, whether you have a unified data platform or a data warehouse or a data mart. And then finally, on the delivery side, which is how is the data actually being delivered and accessible to the end users. And those users could be an analyst, Excel spreadsheet user, someone that's looking at stuff with roll-up or cubes, or it's another developer on an operational platform that needs data in a stream as a screen pop. So again, lots of different ways, but the whole idea is let's have a well-defined process and let's not skip steps. So if someone wants raw content, they know where to get it. If they want to see and make sure that the mapping and transformation occurred, well, they understand where those details are, and it's checked. So now the whole idea of a data supply chain allows me to inject testing and auditing and measurement at the right place. When data shows up at a source, well, lo and behold, I check, is it complete? Did I get all the files? Are all the columns there? Are they value and range details that I expect? I can't apply business checking at this point, but I can make sure the data is complete. Now on to the ETL and data engineering. Again, do what needs to be done and then test it for business rationalization, definition, and reconciliation. Then on the repository side, well, does it fit and align with the various relationship and details to the other tables and the content available? So again, the whole idea here is inject the right type of measurement and processing so you're not overspending, but you also do it at the right place at the right time so you're not wasting time and energy. So what I've done on the next slide, and all of you should have access to these slides. I apologize for the font not sizing on this presentation platform, but we'll get you the right size. I actually put the actual data activities themselves. So, for example, IDing data sources, inspecting, accessing usability, supporting different delivery methods. Again, as I mentioned, is it extract files? Is it an online transactional interface or whatever? That's what occurs during procurement. On the manufacturing side, this is where we're actually doing the source target mapping, cleansing data, standardization, any sort of business particular rules that are necessary. Things like, wait a second, this data needs to be formatted in a particular way, or wait, that description doesn't match, go fix it, or pull and rationalize company names or item names into one of the three standard values. Things like instead of IBM Corporation, it's always standardized as IBM Corp. So IBM Corp, IBM Corporation, we deal with that there. Over on store, that's actually, let's put it into the repositories that are now accessible to programmers and users. Make sure that we update things like catalog and an inventory so people know the data set is actually there. So for those of you that, for example, receive third-party content, if you're in pharmaceutical, you get prescription data. If you're in retailing, you see all kinds of product manufacturing data. If you're in financial services, it could be credit or other types of content. Most of our organizations receive external data on a regular basis. And finally, delivery. The whole idea is data delivered on demand because of a self-service environment, self-service data environment, or in fact is it custom bundled because of a unique application need, or is it to support a particular analytic function. So again, try to map from regular data supply chain, or pardon me, manufacturing supply chain to a data supply chain paradigm. Many of you are already doing things this way. So then what's really the difference, Evan? I'm already doing this. What's the whole premise of the supply chain? Yeah, but what probably isn't happening is establishing what are the standardized item names. Do you make visible the various rules and details at each point? What does a package look like? Is the package complete, or am I just taking source data and dropping it in? And do I expect detail developers to go deal with it? The whole idea here is let's only deliver complete data downstream for the next user, and let's assume that there's multi-purpose usage. So it's refinement, injection of a bit more rigor into how you're doing things, because if someone just wants raw data, well, they know where to get it. If they want rationalized business-centric data, they know where to get it, and they know what the process is on how it's been produced. So closing up on the presentation, the other slides, this other slide I'd have you also consider, so, and I touched on this a moment ago, is the whole idea of, so when do you document what you receive? Well, actually, throughout the entire process, throughout the entire supply chain. If something shows up in inventory, well, we document in the catalog. As we're manufacturing and modifying it, lo and behold, we update that in the catalog, so we put the rules and mapping details and acceptance criteria. And then when we're storing the actual platforms, lineage detail is updated, and if it's a particular business or organizational definition, we update that. Then obviously on the delivery side. So cataloging and documenting is an incremental approach, and the whole premise of measuring, testing, and auditing is also an incremental approach. Did I get what I expected when I received it, or is there a problem? When I'm passing it on to the manufacturing or the ETL process, are they getting what they expected, or did we reformat, change order, and modify values? And then finally, when I'm delivering it to the actual platform, again, let's make sure that all the appropriate relationships, if you want to go wild and have referential integrity, that's when those checks are occurring. So again, you do it incrementally. You don't pile it up and wait till the end, because ultimately what you don't want to have happen is bad items get into your data supply chain. You don't want bad, unusable data to get into your supply chain. And I want to be very, very clear about that, because this isn't about not accepting inaccurate data. It's about establishing what will we accept and what will we not. The whole idea of, something I want to know if there were blanks and voids and details from the source system, that's okay. But that becomes an established acceptance criteria of the supply chain. And we know that. And in fact, it's not uncommon if you take a look at the records. You actually have usable fields or final fields, and then you have source fields. So in this record, while it's a bit longer, I can actually see what that source value is and what the final completed standardized cleansed value is, because I keep them in the record, or I have it referenced into another table. So again, the whole idea here is we document and we measure and test as we go. And the whole idea is let's make sure data becomes a managed asset, and we know all the origin source details. We capture, track, and document the lineage from the point of origin. And this allows us to implement something called change control, which is if values or formats change, we've got a mechanism to not only track it, but capture and make sure it doesn't destroy the downstream environment. Or we increment the version and we communicate to everybody, this file, this record, this table is going to have a new layout. Here's how we'll be supporting it in the next 30 days. A lot of the things we don't think about because we've never had the perspective of user acceptance and uniformity of product. So, tying up a few loose ends here towards the end of my time, the value of data supply chain is really about, let's streamline this to reduce the cost of data and apply some economies of scale, reusability, for lack of a better way of description. We've already applied these methods in development environments with the tooling that we use, with the way that we actually do coding and so forth. Let's apply those same mechanisms to data. It also allows us to formalize data sources to establish standardized content, and we position inspection and auditing and testing and correction at the right time, so we're not doing overkill. What it also establishes is the idea that, when we produce a piece of data, a lot of folks are going to use it, so let's make sure that it's reusable. So, last slide. So what are we telling people? Data is a corporate asset. It's not a commodity, so think about managing it with supply chain, and I'd have you consider a controlled supply chain, more like a pharmacy, not a grocery store. We still have things like privacy. The prior presentation talked about the importance of PII, so we can't just recklessly deliver to everyone. We've got to put some controls in place. So again, more like a prescription in a pharmacy than other things. The other thing to think about is it's not an all or nothing. You can incrementally apply supply chain discipline into data delivery. So please think about, is the data that I'm producing going to be usable by an end user, whether it's a developer or an analyst? Or are they going to have to go become a desktop ETL developer? Because I would challenge you that where we want to be is making data like an office supply, which also says if track, measure, and test throughout the life cycle. The other thing, everybody seems to be obsessed and crazy with the idea of AI. I think this is an area that, in fact, you're already seeing a lot of tooling include some automation capabilities, whether it's scheduling, whether it's checking. The thing that I would tell you is don't be bothered by that. You should embrace it. We're not going to get rid of any staff members. It's just going to make all our activities far more streamlined and far more productive. So with that, David, let me turn it back over to you. And obviously, if you have questions or you have any things to grill me about.
Hey, Yvonne, thank you so much. That's an interesting presentation, and your ketchup analogy, I'm not sure I'll ever lose that again. But yeah, it's some very interesting points, I think. One was, data is delivered at the convenience of the producer, right? Where it really should be delivered at the convenience of the user itself, which makes a lot of sense. I never really thought about data products as a data supply chain, but it makes a lot of sense in doing that. We think about the whole thing as the data journey, right? And each time it moves through that data journey, there's things that happen that enrich, transform, check the quality. Your analogy with the orange juice, if you check the quality of the orange juice once it's packaged, it's way too late, right? So we think of things in terms of a shift left mentality, where you do the testing, and you test every step of the way, but you do as much as possible as early as possible, because it's easier to fix and cheaper to fix at that point in time.
Well, I think the power what Data Gaps brings to the table is the ability to do this type of testing and analysis, very unique to the needs of the actual environment itself. And unfortunately, I think what's happened is we never envisioned data sharing to be this big. We never envisioned things to be used this way. We designed this stuff to deliver reports. And then we evolved and we designed to deliver it for dashboards and other things. And now we have to redesign to support self-service. And I think the tooling and the capabilities that Data Gaps bring to the table allows us to make that adjustment. But there's some procedural things or bigger process things that I think we need to take a good, solid look at. And not to criticize anybody, because we didn't know we were going to be here 10 years ago. So let's be sober about it and realize, it's moved. Target's moved, target's grown. We've got the right tooling now. What do we need to adjust so we're not killing ourselves? Anyway, pardon me for interrupting, but I just wanted to check that.
No, that's the purpose of this session, right? So we have a question from Narain. He's asking, what do you think of data contracts as a mechanism for ensuring the data packages as expected?
Well, the idea of a contract or a service level agreement, I think, is a great idea. I think the thing that we want to be cognizant of is, if I'm a product manager at a company, I don't just focus on what did someone ask for. I actually take a look at the breadth of what people are asking for and trying to create a solution that everybody can leverage. So I think the contract's a great idea, but the thing that I would have you also consider is I aggressively have to always see how things are being used to update and improve if you want to call it the level of service or the variety and the robustness of the package itself. So it's a great place to start, but don't position yourself to cause contention, to cause conflict, because you measure the contract. If the contract's not working, that doesn't mean someone's evil. That means the usage need or the production issue is changed. So sit down, figure out what it is, and then adjust, and do it regularly at the beginning. Anybody that builds a new supply chain realizes, this is what we think is going to work, but let's monitor and measure the dickens out of it. So if it's not a good fit, we adjust, we fix it. So yeah, a great place to start.
Okay. So I had a couple of other questions.
Sure.
You're really talking about changing a discipline of the way you think about data products, and delivery of those. How do you get buy-in from all the stakeholders?
Well, actually, I've had the good fortune of, when you characterize this, the first response is, I'm already doing things that way.
Mm-hmm.
And to which my response is, okay, how many different source files are generated every day. I'll go talk to the source systems. There's no source system in any company that's generating a single set of source extracts a day. It's usually dozens or hundreds. In fact, I worked with a client, a bank up in Canada, where the VP of development said, we're far from perfect, but we bill everything we do to the clients. And what you're suggesting means I've got to take money from another project to do this one. So why should I even consider the supply chain idea? And my remark is, well, let's talk about what you're doing now. Because right now you have at a given time between 15 and 20 maintenance and development projects. And 12 of them right now need customer data. And 12 of those projects have 2 people, 3 weeks inventorying data. So in 6 months, you'll inventory more and again, because you've never documented and established a supply chain that said, here's what the standard data sources are, or the data sources we have, here's the content, so no one has to re-inventory it. I said, again, because you didn't set it up once, you're paying for it 12 times for these 6 months, and then the next 6 months, and the next 6 months, because we haven't thought about data provisioning as reusability and multi-purpose. So what I often find is I get very little pushback when you start taking a look at how much time do your ETL developers spend building versus answering data problems because they didn't know what the data content was. How many different sources are generated, and how much I/O and overnight time and unnecessary storage is being built for not dozens, but thousands of extract files that are duplicates of each other because we went down the path of custom extracts because 10 years ago, we didn't know we'd have hundreds or thousands of them. So the whole premise I'd have you consider is have a discussion. And in a little bit of time, look at the number of extracts that are being generated. Look at the number of ETL and load jobs you have that are touching the same source data, or in fact, delivering it to the same tables. Because think about what's easier, writing an ETL job in Python or an ETL tool to drop data into a table, or someone writing a piece of SQL doing insert select, and how much is more manageable. So how do you get someone to notice? Just talk about the numbers. Because unless you're a brand new environment, you've been doing this 3, 4, 5 years, you don't have a dozen tables on your warehouse. You probably have 1,000 or 10,000. I used to joke, if you have a terabyte, you have 10,000 tables. And people would look at me and then they'd go count and they think about all these work tables and all these other staging things. And many of them are necessary. But when you have a supply chain, you reduce a lot of that because you force a level of streamline mentality.
How do you think about the supply chain? And you're really talking about the data supply chain, but the data pipeline, there's many points of failure in that pipeline, right? It could be the ETL process. It could be underlying software has changed. Could be metadata changes. How do you reconcile all that in the data supply chain?
Well, it's funny when you write code, if you understand a number of different methods, you always set up a unique set of error warning codes, basically to where the error could have occurred. And you have an incremental counter, so when I see an error code, I know where in the code that error happened. In our world of data pipelines and data engineering, the game here is not to prevent bugs. Certainly, we work real hard to prevent that from happening, but we can never foresee every potential circumstance that could happen. So really what we want to make sure is if it did break down, when and where did it break down and why did it break down? So I would argue, go back to my orange example. Most ETL developers today are ELT or data pipeline. And pardon me if I'm using dated terms. Some shops prefer other terms more than others. The idea is a lot of that code is checking and testing on a situation rather than, wait a second, everything coming into me is acceptable, usable data. So in fact, what ends up happening is while a lot of this can be fragile, I'm actually localizing where it could possibly happen and limiting the likelihood. I would argue an ETL job shouldn't receive data that's not that I can't process. I should have filtered it and triggered it before that and filtered it out. The same way I talk about leaves, rocks, and rotten oranges. So what we often do is, because we don't look at this holistically and break it into phases, things do break, and they still will. Nothing's perfect. But I think it's how do we reduce the quantity of breakdowns and how do we limit what the type of problems are. If ETL code is breaking, I would rather have it be a logic problem than a data input issue. The data input issue should have been covered. If I have a data input issue, then I should have checked that on the source side and understand what the details were. So again, it's about making sure that I can expeditiously, quickly find and fix the problem, and in many instances reduce the sheer volume of them because I've done the filtering and the checking as we go, which is actually what your tool set allows.
Okay. Hey, we've just run out of time. I appreciate it, you attending and giving us your insights on